improvement. So what we're going to do first is just hear a short video of some of the feedback we've had, and then we're going to go and discuss some of the areas that are raised.
With regards to response, I've had the calls to call the police before Christmas, using a couple of times really regarding antisocial behaviour in our village. And we're very much directed to use the 101 function, unless, of course, it's an emergency, in which case you do 999. So I had called to use both systems, unfortunately, and the 999 system was very effective, and you obviously get an action from it. I think the disappointing thing for me with 101 is how long it takes to get through. And when you do get through, you get passed around a bit, and then there's no follow-up, there's no number, and nobody checks on it afterwards, which was, disappointing. Also, having to use the 101 online system is quite laborious. Well, my concern there is that other people may get put off using it and reporting crimes because of how long it takes to use that particular function.
101 online and phone, found them very unresponsive to that. When the response has happened, which can be days or weeks later, we've had to chase it up. Again, it was for antisocial behaviour, but was quite a violent and threatening antisocial behaviour. We actually found that it had been classified as completed and didn't get followed up. And once we actually found out that the system hadn't been up and running on the day, and the crime reference we had never got entered into the system. So was tedious and laborious, also very poor in terms of quality of outcome.
And I just wanted to really share my experience of when I phoned 101 in particular. Unfortunately, over the last kind of 12, 18 months, I've had to do that on 2 or 3 occasions due to threats made from a parent towards myself and towards entering school grounds. And unfortunately, I've been a little bit disappointed with the response that I've got, because she's not actually on the premises. On the premises, obviously I would have tried 999. However, I didn't have a response when requesting presence. And I think I felt quite vulnerable as a head teacher then, with a school full of children, when I'm receiving threats from a parent, as I say, to come to school, to do all sorts of things to the school. And especially when you're rural, I think the concern around the lack of police presence with that is, yes, if she comes to school and I dial 999, which I can do, how long is that going to take for somebody to get there when I've got a school full of children?
So we see there a vignette of some of the experience that people feedback, and it is important to contextualise the significant volume of contact that the force gets weekly, and these are just a very, very small snapshot. But one of the individuals raises that difference, or perceived difference, in response to the 999 versus 101. Now, I absolutely get in the nature of non-emergency is it's not a pressing emergency, but how as chief do you balance that difference between the emergency and non-emergency contact in terms of the resources you've got available?
So you're absolutely right in terms of the prioritisation that obviously needs to occur in respect of 999 calls and 101 calls, and many of the members of the public recognise themselves, which I'm grateful. We will always prioritise answering 999 calls. We generally do so within 10 seconds on 90% of occasions, but our core handlers are able to do both, and officers and staff who we use to dispatch our resources to incidents at times of high demand can also answer the telephone. One challenge that has been a real difficulty for us, and we're not alone in this, there's other police forces experiencing it as well in the last few years, has been a change in the proportion of contacts that come to us via 999 and 101. So a much higher proportion of the calls that we receive now are on emergency number compared to the 101 number. Now, I will be totally straightforward in the conversation with you, Commissioner. I think that occasionally people phone 999 because of their frustration and perhaps experiencing a delay to get through to 101. But we have noticed a step change, whether it's societal in terms of a greater impatience regarding receiving a service, and I don't think that's reflected in any of the examples that have been given as part of your consultation, but nationally, people using 999 much more frequently than was previously the case. And I'd encourage anyone watching this video to please use 999 responsibly, because we will always answer it as promptly as we can. But we've always got resources available to answer both 999 calls and 101 calls. We've also improved the technology available to us in our call handling centre so that the telephony is more reliable, so that there is less chance of our ability to answer the phone being impinged upon by technology. And that combination of having the right resource available, we've filled the posts that are part of the organisation's core handling capability, so a very low vacancy factor. And then I've been in conversations with you also regarding increasing the number of posts available to answer the phone. So on any given day, there's a prioritisation that takes place based on the number of 999 calls coming in, the number of 101 calls. 999s will always take priority, and people will understand why. But based on improvements in our technology and filling the posts available and looking to increase the number of call takers that answer the phone, we're confident that our performance in respect of 101 answering will continue to improve. And certainly in the last few months, we've seen a fairly consistent improvement, so that now approximately 70% of 101 calls are being answered within 2 minutes during this year. That's still somewhere short of where we would like to be, but I think reflects some of the improvements around technology and resource that I've alluded to.
That's the other part of the commitment, is the fact that we recognise that the non-emergency performance can be better, i.e. we want to see it improved and taking action to improve it. Just coming back very briefly to this balance over roughly the same number of calls, but the split is different between emergency and non-emergency. You know, the person in the street might say, well, it's the same number of calls. Why does it mean that the performance is going to get worse?
So in simple terms, we will stop what we're doing to answer a 999 call, and a 999 call will override other calls in the system to be presented to the person who might answer it. And so that puts additional pressure on the call handler, and 999 calls then tend to require a greater degree of immediate action in terms of our dispatchers can fall back to answer the phones. We've got a very flexible system, but a 999 call will typically require further action. So the dispatchers of resources immediately to the scene. And so that level of priority that's afforded tends to have a very significant impact compared to a 101 call, where we might be able to arrange to call back the person to speak to them in slower time, or perhaps the follow-up can take place an hour or so later. So we'll prioritise the resource. 999 trumps everything.
And in terms of responding to the incident, I get the call taking element, but in relation to how then what happens afterwards, you've heard some of the feedback being that they didn't always feel the feedback was there, etc. But in terms of an emergency, have you got an assessment as to what the organisation's response to those immediate response, the police action after the call is like?
Yes, so where the call has been received and it's a 999 call, on every call, one of our handlers will perform an initial risk assessment, essentially. So what's the nature of the threat? What harm might be suffered? What's our investigative responsibilities? And where we determine that an emergency response is required, we will dispatch officers immediately. We'll look across the local policing areas to find the most appropriate and closest response. And we set ourselves a target of being there within 20 minutes in all cases. And we meet that approximately 80% of the time on average. It could and should be higher, but you'll appreciate, as will many of the people watching this video, the nature of the geography across the 3 counties, that some areas are a long way apart in terms of the rurality of our counties. But we generally make quick but sophisticated decisions in terms of what's the level of risk associated with this incident. We make a very straightforward classification. If something is an emergency, it receives what we call a grade 1 response, and officers will use their driving training and their exemptions to get there as quick as they safely can.
Some of our communities, and there was an example in the video, said there's a fear about the time it might take to get there. How would you reassure myself and the public that actually overall it is more likely than not that police can get there, you know, in a suitable time to deal with that emergency, and indeed, if you're not reassured, what you're doing to help improve that situation?
I think the public should be reassured regarding emergencies, and I appreciate that certainly the law-abiding members of the public who are watching this session may be unaware of the levels of policing that exist within their local areas. We are resourced effectively to be able to respond to emergencies when the public need us, and that is the base level of expectation that should never change within policing. That where there is a genuine need for an emergency response by a police officer, we will be able to deploy resources appropriately. And there's beyond the response officers that members of the public will see in their local areas, we've also got roads policing officers, we have armed officers, we have many other contributory resources who we can deploy in times of extremis. So we are resourced effectively to be able to respond to emergencies. We will deprioritise certain things so we can respond to emergencies. So if there is a genuine cause where a member of the public feels that they need an emergency response from the police, they must never hesitate in thinking, am I likely to get a response? Because we will always prioritise the response to an emergency, and I can reassure people that they will receive that emergency response.
Some of the feedback in the video, but also in more generally, is around sometimes the level of service that's received. So I know we're just talking about emergency, but talking predominantly about non-emergency, there's sometimes more complex or indeed slower time type issues. That concern, given that there isn't good customer service, i.e. Being given clear expectations as to what will happen, being given the right information, all the elements of things that give us confidence that the organisation is responding. What are you doing about that as chief to ensure that that's not the case as far as possible, and that the levels of confidence once people have made contact with the organisation either is maintained or goes up?
So providing a really good service when people need us is something that is incredibly important to me and to the organisation. So in terms of making sure that the service is responsive, we are seeking to improve the service we provide in response to 101 calls. We've recently introduced a callback system that members of the public will be familiar with from other calls they make, where if we're unable to answer the phone whilst people are waiting, they can select the option to have us phone them back, so that at a time convenient to them, we can phone them back when it may be that our 999 demand is peaking at that point. Then going forward, we frequently monitor on a monthly basis the levels of satisfaction that people have with our service around certain crime types. And that is a really important performance measure for us in terms of the level of satisfaction when people have phoned us, in terms of the immediate response, in terms of the level of service they receive, in terms of the attitude of the officer, and in terms of the amount of follow-up. And Rachel, as Deputy Chief Constable, monitors that performance on a monthly basis, and it's something that is the very top of our list of things in terms of checking.
Indeed, the call centre performance features in our weekly conversation pretty consistently. Thank you. I just want to briefly touch on the other non-emergency route website. Some of the frustration expressed there and elsewhere is that it's not straightforward to do. It's a bit clunky. It's a bit time-consuming, and the like. Those that are listening, or those that are thinking of reporting something non-emergency, why should somebody use the online service rather than using the telephone system?
We're really keen that we offer people a choice of mechanisms, and those who are more comfortable using the online reporting service should feel very confident that every online report we receive will ultimately be risk assessed, will be scrutinised in the same way as a telephone call. And for some people, it's safer to be able to choose their moment to report something to us online, we receive an increasing number of online reports. So generally it's in excess of 100 reports a day via the online service. And we have configured what is a national product to have a West Mercia feel in terms of the ability of members of the public to report things online. It's obviously available 24/7. It's monitored very frequently. We have staff who are in place to review the online submissions. And then we're also seeking to develop our online response so that if people are more comfortable, perhaps in an online setting, we now are able to send someone a link to their mobile telephone, which means they would be able to open up a video conference with us where we can collect any necessary evidence that we need on their call. So we refer to that as rapid video response. And we can use that to follow up on online reports that we've received. I'm also very pleased that as part of our service, we've developed a 24/7 service using British Sign Language for those in our communities who are hard of hearing. So again, that there are different mechanisms dependent on people's needs. We're also examining, as many forces are, the ability to develop a chat reporting mechanism that I hope to see follow in due course. So lots of mechanisms by which people can report things to us. In terms of the question around confidence in the online experience, it's monitored. It will receive the same response or a level of response that's equivalent to that if you phone us. And then we can also follow up in a digital setting if need be by virtue of an online conversation via video.
I've been and seen the teams, and indeed they're the same teams answering the telephone, as you say, flexing resource across. But people talk about the long and complicated nature of all the information it needs. But it's right to say that the information recorded in the online form is exactly the same information that would get captured if they spoke to somebody on a telephone. There's no more information required, is there?
No, and people will appreciate, I'm sure, that by virtue of the fact that we deal with such a breadth of issues, and many of the issues that we deal with are high risk, that there is a requirement for us to collect quite a lot of information so that we can inform providing the best possible response. So we're always looking to streamline that service, but we are providing a more complicated response than perhaps some other settings where people might submit an online inquiry, and the matters that we're dealing with have a higher consequence, and so it's only appropriate that we capture as much relevant information as possible.